And we are live. Thank you, everybody, for coming back to Digital Green Book Podcast. I am Alana Whitaker, and today I have with me an amazing young man, Luke Cooper. I met this young man when I was at Culture Shift Miami and ran into him again at Black Men Talk Tech and have just been following his amazing journey. If you want to know how to make it as a founder inside of this space, there's no better person that I personally feel that you can talk to today. So thank you so much, Luke, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to have this important dialogue. I'm not sure how young I am anymore, and now in my 40s, but I appreciate the compliment nonetheless.
Hey, black don't crack. So let's get into it. You know, it's been fun for me on this founder's journey. Most people in my audience know I was an ICU nurse for 13 years. Before making my way into tech, and just by the virtue of running into amazing people who really are invested in me succeeding, I seem to run into the correct information at the right time. And it was an uphill battle, sort of learning all the nomenclature around this space. Like, oh, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm a founder. Oh, okay. So if I'm looking for funding, then there's all of these different avenues I need to check into. And if I'm seeking funding aside from bootstrapping, you have family houses and angels and VCs, and it was slightly overwhelming at first, but spending more time inside of the ecosystem, you know, you get your feet wet, you crack your neck a couple of times, roll up your sleeves, and you get to it. So I think one of the first questions I want to ask you is, when you decided to go into business for yourself, was there anyone to sort of show you the ropes and help you understand the landscape, or was it I just jumped in head first and started creating things and figured it out as I went?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I had a lot of things going on when I was starting my last company, and I've built a few successful companies now, and so I'll have to sort of unpack that in a couple different ways, right? I can talk about the last sort of experience. I think that's probably the most recent and most relevant. But making the transition, from being a practicing attorney, that's where I started as an M&A lawyer. Go to law school. I went to law school because, quite frankly, as a Black person, coming from abject poverty, oftentimes you don't get the opportunity to choose, a career path that's closer to your passion, right? You got to choose something that is likely to make you money and likely to like pay back loans and make your mom and dad happy. In my case, my father was in prison. He ultimately passed away, but he did 20 years in prison. And so I didn't have that, sort of as a backstop to sort of think through, career choices. And I use a lot of my own intuition, right? And I think as Black people, particularly Black people with lived experiences that grew up in places like Bridgeport, Connecticut, where I'm from, or Baltimore, Maryland, where I live today. We have all these lived experiences that inform our intuition and give us a clear idea of like what's good, bad, or indifferent for us. And so I always tell people never to divorce themselves of that, right? So like use that intuition first and foremost as a guide to sort of push you, prompt you into like your whatever entrepreneurial endeavor you want to pursue. It's going to be scary, right? But being fearful, that's not the intuition I'm talking about. Like the intuition is like when you know that this idea or this problem that you're interested in solving is a real big problem that has, a good bounty if you're successful in solving it, right? When you feel that strongly about something, you should just jump in and do it. I do think that there are some tactical things though that you should do before you just jump in and do it. Like, because we can't always afford to just leave a job, and go to friends and family money and get friends and family money to support, whatever idea we have. I mean, there are now resources like, for example, in the state of Maryland, during my time at the Maryland Technology Development Corps, we created what's known as the Builders Fund, which is a friends and family network for Black founders that exists today. Every state has some kind of version of that. And so I always encourage founders to first go out and seek that kind of money, because oftentimes that kind of money is non-dilutive or has very little, dilutive impact on the business that you're building. But then also it can give you the time you need to like explore an approach before you sort of leave your job, right? Before I leave my job, I got to know that the thing that I'm pursuing has the ability to 10x, be 10x better than everything else that's on the market, and and provide that much value to a very defined customer base. And then once you figure that out, it's just you're pulling the trigger, right? And I think taking those courageous steps are things that Black people do every day of our lives. And so, these things are not hard for us. Oftentimes we just are missing, some of the tactical, planning steps that other people just have access to. So happy to elaborate more on that, but hopefully that answers your question.
It definitely does, because oftentimes we don't get that chance, like you were talking about, here's a nice roadmap and I'm just going to follow the yellow brick road and here comes success. You're literally, I find at least some of the most interesting ideas I've seen while I've been out here attending pitch competitions and going to conferences and literally trying to be as in many spaces as possible where people are iterating their ideas, and from every phase, like from seed stage or ideation, it's still in their head, all the way to fully scaled businesses. And some of the things I never considered along the journey, like honestly, until some of the more recent conferences, I didn't even know about exit stage planning. I know that might seem basic to some people who've been in this ecosystem a long time, but when you're living in that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that bottom rung for so long, like, okay, I'm just trying to eat, I want my dream out there, you're not thinking of the whole playbook. And I know there's some great books out there that to help lean startup, different things like that now, but it's still, that's theory versus what you're actually living in the moment.
Totally. And it's a great point, Alana. I just to pick up on that point, there's a lot of general startup, information about how startups work and what's a seed round and, what's a convertible note, how do you get advisors? I mean, there's a lot of information online, but there's no one place where all of that information exists. And there's no one place where all that information exists in the way that, will help inform Black people on how to make the journey from what they're currently doing into tech. And so I think we're limited in that way, but it comes down to, I think, asking people, being courageous enough to, like, when you're met with something that you don't understand or you don't know, or there's a direction you're uncertain of, the best person that you can, find that has some proximity to a response to that, question, like find that person and just ask, right? And I think some that for me has yielded so much. In fact, typically when I've asked for advice and feedback on, like, how to approach a certain thing or whether a thing makes sense to approach it, I've gotten investment, right? And so when you ask for advice, you usually get money. And when you ask for money, you usually get advice, right? So those are, again, that's a secret, a little gem right there that, other folks know that we don't know. And so we go around, we ask for money and people tell us no, we get upset, and then ultimately we can't pursue our vision the way we want to. But, these little tips and tricks are things I think that help us, more naturally sort of expand our interest and our ability into tech.
So let's get into that for a moment, because I think that is probably, oopsie, he clicked the wrong button. He'll be back shortly. The question I want to get into with him is definitely going to be the one I hear most from founders. Literally, that is the pain point for most startups, most businesses that are in seed stage. They're like, here he goes.
Sorry about that.
I already knew it.
My bad.
So, no, that was a great point. And I think one of the pain points that I hear the most from founders, like people out here doing the work, applying to every pitch competition they can, reading as many books, applying to accelerators, having meetings with their team, trying to scale back, budgeting, like doing the things that they can do while still trying to make their MVP, getting the most viable product as they can with $2, a stick of gum, and a shoestring. But startup funds are a pain point for most founders, especially people getting it out of the mud. So what would be one of your pieces of advice for people who are seeking capital? Because that's probably the conversation I have with founders most often when they do talk to me or confide in me about some of the ills of the things they go through on their day-to-day.
Yeah, I would say that it's like hustler's ambition that is balanced with strong core values and strong cultural value position that you take, values, right? Like so when I think about like the hustle is like just like having lots of conversations, talking to anybody who's willing to listen to the story, finding investment, anywhere. Like honestly, I think a lot of founders, they think of like tech as one, sort of one dimensional. Whereas I'm not a real founder unless I get a venture capitalist to write me a check. That's not reality. That's not true, right? Like you don't have to get venture capital dollars to be a successful entrepreneur. Folks like, Temi Toke from Calendly prove that, right? Like he didn't raise any real venture capital dollars in the $6.5 million that he raised, growing and building Calendly, right? And now, it's worth $3 billion, right? And so like you can get there on a lot less than you think you can, right? And I think there are tools that support, kind of that evolution as well. Things like Airtable, Instapage, where you can like launch, little landing pages that give you insight into how customers are thinking about your value proposition, right? There are all kinds of things that you can do. I got a founder, from Miami that we have been talking to, got to like almost $1 million in annual recurring revenue on like duct tape. You know what I mean? So like you can get a lot further than you think you can on very limited resources. There's no question about it. And I get it. Like Black people, we just tired of like having to work harder with less resources. It's like, I know I can succeed and I know there's a game to be played, and you are saying that I can go play that game, but then you tie one hand behind my back, and in many instances, two hands behind my back, right? And so I get it. We're tired of that, but like that also creates the kind of, sort of natural instincts and ability to survive and thrive in an entrepreneur that will help you like succeed even when, the chips are down, you're weeks away from cash flow zero. I mean, I've been there, right? My last company, right before the pandemic, we were 6 weeks away from losing payroll, right? And I flew out to Las Vegas on a one-way trip and stalked the founder or the CEO of Assurant, Fortune 300 company, had a conversation with him that led to the acquisition. But again, I never saw myself as like lacking resources or lacking the ability, to at least, engage in battle, engage in the fight, identify potential resources. And so like whether you're having a conversation with a VC or you're having conversations with, some old, rich white dude on the street, like those are opportunities to tell your story, right? To tell the story of what you're building and why you're building it. And then, that maybe that person writes a check, even a small check. If you get 10 people to write you $10,000 check, a $10,000 check, that's $100,000, right? And if you've got, 2 people on your team, and you could do that twice, like you raised $200,000 now to support the team for a year potentially. Like that's significant, right? And so I think seeing opportunity in every little conversation, I think is critical, right? Like when I would join these kinds of calls as a young founder trying to think about like how to fundraise and get further along, like I would follow up with the speaker, and I would ask them questions. I would say, hey, can you point me in the right direction, right? Because even if I only know a little bit more than you, that little bit more than you might push you in the right direction, right? So I think see the world that way, see every opportunity that way, even within your employee base. Some employees that you go after, you have some CTO type that is a technical person working in a big company like Google, right? They've made decent money and they want to come join you as a co-founder or as a early employee. Maybe they want to come in and also put a little bit of money in, right? And so those are opportunities as well, right? So don't accept no as an answer, right? Like every no should be followed up with why? Well, why did you say no? Well, what circumstances under which circumstances would you say yes? Right? Like all of that feedback are the things that we need to consistently feed our model so that we're moving in a direction that's going to lead us to more fundraising, more success, and better outcomes. Right? Ultimately, the goal is to exit the company, right? To build a company that's successful enough that the asset itself is valuable, that someone wants to acquire it, IPO, or something else. But along the way, you're going to have to fundraise, and that means you're going to have lots of conversations with people that you don't know and be comfortable asking every question imaginable.
That's such an interesting skill set to have. I consider myself the type of person, as you know, I walk up to a polar bear in a snowstorm and have a conversation with them. So I think that particular barrier for some people is a hard one because a lot of people are introverted. But that is a skill that you have to hone if you want to be successful in this space. That's a very good point. What would you say was one of the defining moments when you got a no and you pushed until you got a yes?
Yeah. There are lots of moments like that, right? We had, again, like every no doesn't mean no, right? Like, so I took a meeting once with a very well-known venture firm out of New York, out of Connecticut, actually. Many billions in assets under management. We were just about to hit our Series A. It was a long shot that they would invest in me, but the guy, Matt, who I had developed this great relationship with, again, you ask for money, you get feedback. You ask for feedback, you get, potentially money. And so I was just getting feedback from him, tons of feedback over email. Like once he accepted the invitation to be friends and like to advise me, to share information, I took him up on that, right? I can't tell you how many people will get opportunities like that with someone who says, hey, yeah, call me anytime. I'm happy to help, but I don't have a check for you. And then they just say, oh, well, I'm done talking to you. No, you got to develop relationships, because those relationships sometimes help people think about you and think about your specific needs in ways that you hadn't thought about before. So this guy, Matt, had been thinking about me and said, hey, why don't you come up to New York so we can have a formal, sort of face-to-face. I'm going to invite, one of our other entrepreneurs who we backed. And, ultimately he sold the company that he created to Google. It was, everybody here on this call is heard of Google Payments. Google Payments didn't exist, right? Google didn't have the infrastructure internally to release a payments platform, and they wanted to very much to compete with Apple. And so they went out and they found, a payments, transactions fintech startup called TSVia. The guy who founded that, had built it, successfully over time, and exited to Google for maybe $500 million, right? So it was a great outcome for him personally. And he's now a member of this venture firm. And I didn't know all of this background with Google. All I know is like the two venture capitalists are going to be in this meeting with me in New York City. And so I just, I had this great conversation with them. Probably an hour into the conversation, they were peppering me with tons of questions. And the main guy, right, Matt, the main guy, who's really the VC, is like, yeah, I love where you are, I love what you're up to. Probably like a little too early for us. And, but like, God, Luke, you're such a great entrepreneur. And thank you. I appreciate that. And we just kept the dialogue going. I didn't put my head down and like get upset or all right, guys, thank you for the meeting. Bye. Right. It was like, well, thank you for that feedback. And kept asking questions about like our finance journey and how we should think about raising capital, et cetera. So having that conversation, for another hour after, I got the no. And then I get up to walk out, at the end of the meeting, it's, now we're 2 hours in, and, the one guy who's the other guy in the meeting, follows me out, and he's like, hey, Luke, I get that you're too early for them because they're, $1 billion AUM investment firm. But, I've got my own little sidecar vehicle that I invest out of, we invest anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million a year in different things. I'd love to explore that with you. It's like, what? Hell yeah, that's great.
Sure.
I had put in the work under duress, answering those questions in the way I did. I didn't have to go back through that again, right? Because he saw me do that in a high pressure scenario, right? But I wouldn't have done it that way. Most of us wouldn't do it that way if we knew we were going to get a no, right? Don't let those no's affect how you move, right? Like when you're on the basketball court and someone cuts you off, right, or or blocks your shot. If you put your head down and stop, the game is over, right? You got to go run to the other side, with the same level of enthusiasm that you use to go down to the basket on the offensive side and play defense, right, and then go back again on offense and try again, right? And so that is the same way when it comes to building, successful companies. And like they were investors with me all the way to the end. We ultimately, exited the business. When I exited, we were doing about $500 million of new revenue for the acquirer. The company had created $3 billion of market cap. It does over 2 million service transactions annually now, is integrated into 8,000 T-Mobile stores. And all of it starts with those little $25,000, $50,000 conversations that lead to, some gas in the car that keeps your car going.
You're such an impressive person to me, not due to the volume of things that you handle, although clearly that's for a lot of people from our community, even unsurmisable, like the even be around that amount of wealth and just be able to navigate through. But I think there is something endogenous in a person. It's internal. It just exists there when you have that level of resilience. Like I've seen it in people from different backgrounds, like some people who've been through hardships, and then some people who might not have had visibly as hard of a life, but they've had their own hardships in their lives as well. I think that's just something unique and special that, I mean, it probably can be trained and cultivated, but you just have it, that level of resilience. And I think that was beautifully summated. Like most people don't think about that. Sometimes when people have frustration, it shows on their face in the meeting that didn't go their way, or things of that nature, and they're sullying other opportunities along the way. So I would love you to touch a little bit more on that. Was that something that you cultivated? But I really think that's just your personality. But when things don't go your way exactly, you still look for opportunity in that growth opportunities in that.
Yeah, no,
Is
for
that
sure.
something you've been able to teach people to do as well?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Right. Like I try to, teach people to go into a conversation with an open mind, right? Like you could get told yes, you get told no. And, either of those is just an answer, right? It doesn't, mean that you should, jump, over the moon if you get told yes, or you should, bury yourself under the ground if you get told no. I think you've got to develop, a level of like, just stability within yourself that doesn't allow you to move, like to move off of like your goal and like what your mission is, right? Because think about it, if your mission is to build a marketplace, where Black talent can be found and develop for large manufacturing companies, because we don't see Black people in manufacturing companies or something like that, right? If that's your mission and you believe that, like what's gonna derail you from that? Like what? And if you truly see that as your purpose in life to go solve that problem, right? You should let nothing derail you, right? And if someone says, "Great, here's a check for you," awesome. I'm still going focused on my mission. The mission is what give you the happiness, the courage, the joy, the enlightenment that you're looking for, as opposed to like the check from investors, right? That's a little bit of fuel, but like that's not the thing, right? And so I absolutely tell founders like to hone in on their purpose in life and their mission in life more so than like, what they're seeing around them. The other thing I try to harp on too is like being mindful, like being aware of yourself. I had this conversation not too long ago with a friend who wasn't very mindful on a phone call, right? And the call and the conversation was just like, hey, maybe you should like think more about like how you show up to those calls, and about, your own personal sort of, appearance and how those people are experiencing you. Because like if the more you think about that, the more like you can be aware of like your mood, your attitude, your reactions to things, and then what impact that has on the people who are listening to it, right? And when I became more mindful early on in the process, 2014, this is a time when people were not investing in Black people. 2013, 2014, 2015, right? People did not, there's no conversation about like, oh, we should increase the investment in Black people, right? But I would see these conversations, I would have them. And if I, kind of slumped in my seat or was like, oh, that sucks that you're not going to invest, like I would see the reaction on the person that was, having the conversation with, and it changed their perspective too. It like curtailed the conversation and ended it prematurely, right? And a lot of times, I've gotten so much out of just like, all right, let me just not react that way and see how they react. And usually that reaction of me not like, showing a overt reaction has led to them like changing their mind or saying, hey, I know I told you no, but I got 4 other people who have been looking for your exact kind of thing. Let me connect you with them and see what happens. And like so many times that's led to another check from some other angle. And so I just encourage founders just to be that way, be naturally curious and asking questions about any response you get, even the yeses, right? Like we have a way oftentimes where we just turn off when we get the answer we want, right? Right? As founders, we say, oh, okay, I'm raising $100,000, and then you get someone that says, all right, I'm in for 50, And we're like, yes, that's it. Awesome. I got, we're in for 50. I got 50 to go. That's it. And then now you're keep. No. Well, why did you say yes? Well, what got you to a yes? What was the moment at which you really understood the business? Do you have confidence in me that as a founder, right? These are hard questions to ask, but they're illuminating because it helps you to then understand at critical moments what you said that then drove that outcome. And then just repeat it, right? It's the same thing you're doing in your business. It's the same thing you're doing with your product. So if you can't apply that to fundraising, you're not going to be successful with your product, right? You got to be able to apply that in both scenarios. So you're absolutely. It's a great question. I absolutely encourage my founders to think that way.
I think that particular skill is something that does need to be honed in specifically the Black founder community as well. We know the stats on funding, period. Less than 2% of funds, and then even more dire for other types of founders who fall under that category as well. So what are some of the things that you see now as a successful founder who's exited multiple times and is now a venture capitalist? What are some bridges or schools or pathways that we can begin co-creating for individuals who need this information? I mean, like you said, 2014, that's not even 10 years ago. The landscape has changed so drastically between then and now, and your success story is a beautiful unicorn. And I do know other individuals that have had success inside of this space, but the level of arduousness to their stories are just as gritty. Like, dang, you had to do all that just to, which is beautiful. The struggle is beautiful because of a level of grit and resistance that you need to survive in this world. But do you feel that onus sometimes, like, how can I make this an easier pathway for people after me?
Oh, I feel it every day. I wake up with that feeling every single day. Just to ground you a little bit, Alana, and I think some of these stats because you've heard me reel them off before. I'm one of 3 Black, founders to get to an 8 or 9 figure exit in 2020 during COVID, right? It was COVID year. I'm one of 2 Black founders, 3 Black founders in this now 3 after last year, 3 Black founders in the state of Maryland to reach a material tech exit, to sell it, to build a company, raise money, and then sell it for net positive gain. Like that's only happened 3 times to 3 Black founders in the state of Maryland, right? 2 of those founders live in California now. All right, I'm the first Black founder to do that in Baltimore City, a city that is 65% Black, right? So these are really difficult things, but that's not the freaking assignment. My assignment is not to be first and to be the only one. That's a lonely place to be, right? Like where the world I want to exist in is where a lot of us are winning and we're winning together. And I live at the Four Seasons. I live in a great residence at the Four Seasons. It's amazing, right? But I look around. I'm like the youngest dude, one of the only Black people in my whole building, right? It's not fun, right? It's not fun to be here, right? So I direct founders to a bunch of places that I think are resources that can help drive knowledge, awareness of the market, understanding of how this all sort of plays out, whether it's, you're exiting the business to a financial buyer or strategic buyer or something else. All of those things to me are important to understand as a founder. So you have some sense of the direction you need to go in to get to some sort of outcome, right? Because ultimately we got to close the wealth gap, right? And one of the ways that we're going to do that is through founders raising money, building on their ideas, on their innovations that are supporting some of the most important American enterprises on the globe today, right? And then getting value for those assets that we've created, right? And so that has to happen, right? So you got to understand the whole gamut of opportunities and the entire game to cause that, right? But some of the resources that are out there today, I mean, Afrotech, has a ton of resources on their website. Y Combinator has a ton of free resources on their website. Career Karma, for example, is another resource that I always sort of tell black folks about, just to get familiar with tech jobs that are available to them if they have no familiarity with it, right? And I think also there's a level of humility that's required too. As Black people, we're just proud, and I think I love it. I love our heritage, and we should be proud because we've gone through like just tremendous challenges in this country. There's no question about that, and we've overcome it with grace and style, right? Like we just do things at a level that no one else can do, right? Right? But at the same time, a level of humility is required too, right? I'll give you an example. There's a founder that in one of our portfolio companies. He was essentially like, the chief data science officer at one of the largest agencies in the US, NSA, and built a thing internal at the NSA that really worked. And he said, I quit. I'm going to go quit and do something else because this thing that I built is going to be very valuable. But he didn't go jump on that idea right away because he understood that I need to learn. How tech works. How, what are the biz dev functions within a tech startup? How do the customer support functions work? How do you begin to think about early sales versus later sales? All of these things were things that he just didn't know. So he left and took maybe a $50,000, $60,000 a year job at a company called Databricks. Databricks, when he joined, was around, maybe 400 million in valuation. By the time he left in 2 years, a year and a half. By the time he left, Databricks was 40 billion in valuation. And he had got himself an incredible education during his time there. And then, he went to the founders and said, hey, I got this idea that I've been working on. What do you guys think about it? And they were like, we love it. They became investors in it, right? Then they introduced him to two of the biggest names in the world of VC today. And this is a Black man that went to 3 Black colleges, right? This don't happen for us. But again, it comes through humility, asking questions with no expectation in mind, right? And he went to them. They didn't say, hey, I got this great idea that I'm working on. It's great. Will you invest? He just said, I got this thing I've been working on. And the whole reason I came through your company and did this work over the last year and a half is so I can learn. So when I go do this, then it's successful. What do you guys think? And that opened the door for all of this great stuff. And now, he's raising 50 million on a $500 million valuation, and he's going to do it, right? He's going to do. NEA led the seed round, right? And this is us. This is us. And these are stories that we don't hear about. No one talks about because we just don't know about them, right? And like people don't always appreciate what we go through to get to that level, right? But he got there, and I'm encouraging other, Black founders like myself and the ones on this call to think about, adding humility and sort of like this open-ended, sort of Q&A, with seeking feedback earnestly and honestly from whoever they're talking to whenever they can.
Every point in your journey has made you who you are now. But if you could go back to the beginning of your founder's journey without disrupting the things that you've amassed now and tell yourself one thing that you could do sooner to make your journey more optimal, what would that be?
Don't put so much emphasis on scale. I think as founders, the first thing we think is like, oh, I got this business, I got a thing, I got to scale it, right? No, companies exist in 3 dimensions, period. I don't care what the folks on this call, I don't care what you're doing, you're in one of 3 places right now. You're either in product, you're scaling, or you're optimizing. That's it, right? And oftentimes we start backwards. We optimize the thing that was this little small thing that we're working on. We're trying to get the website perfect. We're trying to get the verbiage perfect. We're trying to get the flows perfect. We're trying to get build all these integrations because we know we're going to need to integrate into Slack, into HubSpot, into all the tools. We're going to need a browser extension. And so we go off building all of this shit without a real customer yet, right? And so I think I wouldn't tell myself, if I started my founder journey, what to do, right? Differently. I might tell myself what not to do, right? And I think sometimes as a founder, it's more impactful and more, influential on your journey, positively influential on your journey for you to define the things that we're not going to do, right? And I think the sooner you can do that as a founder, the better off you are, because it just takes some things away from you that you might, spend resources that are limited, right? As a founder, all you've got is time and sometimes a little bit of capital. And if you misuse those things, you're out of business, right? You're out of business. And so I would recommend, if I had to go back, I would just not do certain things. Like I want to say I hired a world-class CRO, chief revenue officer, out of the gates, right? This is a guy who was making $1 million a year running AOL, right? He was the chief revenue officer for AOL, president of one of their business units, and had caused, I don't know, maybe that business line had like maybe what was like second or third largest business unit within AOL. And he was an absolute lion, right? And he brought on his COO who was, worked with him. And, one guy had previously made $500,000 a year and the other guy was making $1 million a year. Like, why am I hiring those guys when we're at like $7,000 in MRR a month, right? Like, those are not the right hires, right? You hire those guys way later once you figured out repeatability into your sales models. Once you figured out like, oh, yeah, I know I'm going after enterprise, right? But not these enterprises, right? Only these enterprises, right? And so once you have a better understanding of that, that's usually the better time to start making those kinds of hires. I jumped out of the gate and sort of made those hires. I had to fire them, early on into the process within 6 months because it's draining cash and they weren't productive. But like, how could I make them productive when we're only doing $7K and monthly recurring revenue? Because we were meant to be in that product phase. And in the product phase, you're hiring different people than you would when you're scaling, right? And so like, that's just one example. I have thousands of them. We won't get into all of them today, but yeah, it's a mistake that a lot of us make.
I think you're a wealth of knowledge, and the experiences that you've been through are invaluable. What I'm actively seeking to do is create these types of pathways for founders, because my heart just goes, I'm ooey gooey empathetic. So as I come across these individuals who are so brilliant, but the first time you said the word tired, I felt you in the past and the fatigue that you were feeling in that moment when you said tired. Like, I felt like, I bet, are you proud? I know you're proud of yourself, but do you feel like you've accomplished enough for you to be satisfied with yourself from the past?
Yeah, that was yesterday though, right? Like that was yesterday. Yeah, I did some things, 2 successful, exits, software enterprise exits to, 2 publicly traded companies. The last one integrated all over the world, right? We're, the customers from Japan to Germany to the US, Canada, all over, right? It's amazing and fun. It's cool, like, to see, my last company, NYPD, was one of our biggest customers, all 37,000 police officers, right? And I would go to New York and I for various things, meetings with investors or whatever. And, I'd stop cops on the street and I just would take pictures sometimes, right? Because, our apps were running on their devices, protecting their devices from, whatever, bad things were happening to them, whether they were, sort of, the physical damage or internal damage or anything like that. And so it was exciting, right? But I think for us, it's just different, right? Like, I think if I was just an unaware, non-mindful, tech entrepreneur, just a regular white dude that, didn't have to think about race at all, you could sit back and you could just be excited and happy about, those kinds of achievements, right? But I can't, right? Because when I think about those kinds of achievements, I also recognize that, my success, in acquiring, for example, an NYPD, police division, right? To have all 37,000 police officers on my platform, right? Using my product, as an entrepreneur, that is a proud feeling, right? But how am I any different from Eric Gardner? Right? Eric Gardner was an entrepreneur. He was an entrepreneur. They just see me differently, right? Because they see tech and they see me and they hear how I'm talking, right? And that makes them feel safe. Eric Gardner wasn't doing anything illegal. He was selling cigarettes, right? He's an entrepreneur. He's like, from where I'm from, like, people sell Lucy's all day long, right? Like that's a thing, right? And my father used to sell Lucy's, and $1 for 1 cigarette, that's a lot of money over time, right? And so we got all kinds of hustles, but like, until Black entrepreneurship is visible and obvious to people, I will never be, sort of, sit on my laurels and just like revel in my achievements, right? I think that's my purpose in life, to make Black entrepreneurship in all its forms obvious to people and the value of it, to be, you know, aware to people. I don't think they see it, right? Because if you did, you would see Eric Gardner differently, and he would still be here. He wouldn't have been choked by those same NYPD police officers, you know, that were using my app, right? So yeah, that's kind of how
I asked that because I can hear it in your voice. Like, you do feel accomplished, but there's this level that you're still working towards. And I know that feeling very well, and I hear it. So that's why I asked.
But I mean, Mandela was happy to get out of prison, right? For sure. But like, was he happy? Like, no, because like Black people in South Africa were still not free, right? So like, until there's a world in which, you know, the $82 trillion in US assets are managed by more than the 99.4% straight white males that manage it today, I'm not going to be happy. Like my achievements are just a small, you know, drop in the bucket in this, you know, massive, you know, affluence that exists in America that we have no access to, right? And like, we make up 40-50% of the workforce, but we don't, you know, manage 40-50% of the assets that our labor is producing, right? And so I can't be, you know, cheery and happy about that. I'm happy about the future because I think it'll be different, but like, we've got a responsibility and obligation together to make that different for everybody, not just Black people, white people, and everybody else whose lives are impacted by the consequence of our success or lack thereof.
That's an amazing point, and I have a question on that. But y'all, if you have questions, now's the time to drop them because we're wrapping soon. Dantrell asked, Is it a good idea to work with consultants instead of hiring?
No. I think about it this way, right? If you were Davy Crockett and you were trying to figure out like how to go from, you know, from Virginia to Tennessee, right? Or to St. Louis, like, that's not a place that we had traversed as a country, right? No one really knew how those maps worked, right? No one had a real accurate survey of that land. Like, can you imagine Davy Crockett like outsourcing that to somebody else? No, right? He was so successful because he had lived so long in the wilderness and, like, you know, had navigated, you know, for a long time in the wilderness. He was able to use his sense of smell, his sense of sight, his knowledge of the terrain, his knowledge of, like, you know, certain environmental factors, like, you know, which way rivers were flowing to find the passage, right, to the Midwest and to Tennessee and places like that, right? Like, imagine him outsourcing that, right? Like, he wouldn't have been successful, right? And so, like, it's the same thing as a founder. Like, you gotta get in the mud, right? My platform is mud to magic, right? And I talk a lot about that, right? But because the magic is created from the mud. It comes from opening your eyes as you're traversing that mud and seeing what's around you, seeing how these pieces come together, how they play out. So by the time you get through the mud, you really understand like how to transform that mud into magic for other people, right? And those skills that you're learning along the way are teaching you like really what your customer wants versus like what you think they want. Because I guarantee you, if you spent time, if you outsource, I'll give you another example. If you outsource to a consultant, customer discovery, right? I want to understand what big companies like Coca-Cola, you know, how they resolve their IT support tickets today. They're going to give you an answer. You're going to pay them a lot of money. They're going to give you an answer. They're going to give you a standard answer, right? Because they're going to call that customer or call customers like them, talk to them on the phone, and customers are going to say a thing. They're going to write it into a report, and they're going to give it to you. Now you have that information. What's missing from that? What's missing from that is all the same Davy Crockett stuff that I was describing, right? The sense of smell, taste, to know that this berry only grows in in places where there's a northern sort of exposure to sunlight or whatever those things are, right? Like all of those little meticulous details are what tell you what actually to build, right? Because if you sat in front of that customer, despite the fact a consultant giving you that homework, giving you that information, but if you sat there with that customer and actually watched them, I guarantee you what they actually do versus what they say are two different things. And the quicker you can figure that out, that is the business. That is the business. It's not the thing that you think it should be. It's the thing that they're not telling you, in terms of how they're solving the problem today. I did this with Coca-Cola as one of our earliest customers. I sat with them. I sat in their IT organization, in their IT department. I would just look over their shoulder and see what they were doing. And what they were describing to me versus what they were actually doing, two totally different things. I would have missed that, and Coca-Cola would not have been my client who I talk to this day, pretty, frequently, if I had gone to a consultant. I would not have had that information.
Wow. That was a message for me. That was a message for me specifically, because I want to make sure I'm not doing what I think needs to be done. I need to be doing what needs to be done. So I need to spend a little bit more time refining my research tactic.
Think
David
big, act small. Think big, act small. Think big, act small. Think big, act small. Doesn't mean that you can't have this bold vision for what you want to do and how you think about the world. But these small incremental steps, sitting with a customer and looking at how they're actually solving the problem they said they're solving, is a small step that will then help you reframe the big stuff, right? So keep thinking big, right? Believing big, but keep acting small until now, okay, I can act bigger. I can think about scale differently. Another question. I know I'm going long here.
No, you're good. This is invaluable to me. David asked,
I really hope so.
How is it viewed to give equity for work in lieu of cash to early employees?
Yeah, that's what you should do, right? Equity is a great unifier, right? Is a great equalizer, right? Because it puts me in the same boat as you, right? You wanna incentivize your early employees that way by giving them equity. And there's standard sort of equity packages. If you look on Y Combinator's website, there's a ton of stuff, background on that, like how much equity you should allocate. But just always be thinking in terms of actual equity, right? Instead of equity percentages, right? Because I see a lot of founders make that mistake. Oh, I'm going to give 1% to this person, 1% to that person, 2% to that person. Don't think about it in those terms. Think about it in terms of the actual allocation. What does 1% actually mean? 1% might mean, okay, 1 million shares. Okay, well, maybe I just want to give you 200,000 shares, right? Because 200,000 is a big number. That's a big number, right? If each one of those units of shares eventually is worth $5, $6 a share, they got a thing that could potentially be worth a lot of money, right? So I always think in terms of the actual share number as the allocation piece, and then also marry that to vesting, right? You should not be giving out stock, okay, I'm going to give you 200,000 shares and here you go. First and foremost, they're going to pay taxes on that right away. So you don't want that to happen. Secondly, right, you want that money to be vesting, because what happens if you give them stock and they just walk away, right? We had, like most founders, a 4-year vesting period with a 1-year cliff. That means that you don't really capture your stock until you've been with me for a full year, and hold true to that, right? I don't give a shit if you're with me for 11 months and 28 days. Unless it's the month of February, you're not getting the full allocation of your stock, right? Because that should be a hard, cliff for people to achieve. So nothing wrong with giving out stock early on. Definitely something you should do.
I think one of the last questions that I want to ask, because I absolutely love this discourse. I'm actively creating pathways for people. I'll be touring across roughly 10 cities in 2023 with my co-founders, doing some amazing initiatives.
Love it.
I want to give somebody the opportunity to shadow or intern under you. Is that a possibility that I could give to someone?
Yeah, I mean, as long as they bring a camera.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We're actually looking for somebody who can help us sort of tell we talk about this kind of stuff all day long as we're building a Black VC, and we'd love to sort of showcase, broadcast more of that to the world, because these lessons are valuable, and I think also this part of the world has just been closed off to us, right? Closed off to a lot of people. It operates like a old boys club, so to speak. And we want to break some of that. My partner is a badass, Black woman investor, and it's important for people to see, how we interact, our success together, and how we're building, this next iteration of venture funds for the rest of us.
I'm grateful for that, and yes, your other co-founder's name is Alana.
That's right.
So Alanas are awesome, by the way. Thank you so much for that. And I definitely will follow up with you via email about that. I've been asking that of people that I see in the spaces that I think not only myself, but other people should be in. So that's very gracious of you to offer that. As we come to a close, what's the final thought that you have, if you had to talk to this very specific population, I want to just point out that I have a pretty big audience on LinkedIn for what LinkedIn is worth. And I had 4 times the signups for this particular interview. Like, people are floored by your background and are easily able to identify with who you are. What would you say, something that you think is practical for, and the bulk of my audience is early stage founders, what would you say is something practical that they might not be thinking of, which is something that they should consider doing as we go into this new year? Ways for them to optimize themselves as individuals, as businesses, just something that out of the box that they're not thinking of that would help them improve.
Yeah. Mental health, right? Invest in their own mental health, right? This journey is difficult. You know, when I started out in 2012 with Fixt, I started in 2012. Just start thinking about the idea. I didn't really start in earnest. You know, we didn't launch until 2014, but in 2012 we had the idea. 2013, I actually filed, you know, my paperwork and began like actively working on it. But we didn't really have an idea that was like a venture backable idea until 2014 when I got into Techstars. All right, but 2012, I had my first cousin who lived with me growing up. You know, he was shot in the head and killed. Right, I couldn't get out of bed for a whole day. You know, and he was killed by another first cousin of mine. Right, over nothing. And then, you know, 2013, my father died. Right, he had been in prison for 20 years. 12 of the 20 he came out. Still wasn't living right, and then passed away. We had a difficult relationship that I didn't know how to compartmentalize, right? And then 2014, and this all happened around the same sort of spring timeline, 2012, 13, and 14. But in 2014, as I'm starting Fixt, you know, my daughter, you know, she was 4, our oldest 4. Our son was 2 years younger than her. She was struck with stage 4 cancer, right? So you know, now I'm like, all right, now I got the idea. Now I got a couple dollars behind me to sort of back some friends and family money. I'm starting to get going. And then boom, February 7th, 2014, you know, get a call like, hey, she's going to get surgery. We're going to be here. This is it. And we go from a Friday afternoon appointment with her pediatrician to surgery on Monday to a full year of chemotherapy and radiation, right? And so, like, you don't know what's going to happen, right? You just don't know. As you embark on your founder journey, like another COVID could happen. What kind of impact has that had on, you know, the rest of us, you know, relative to our mental health, right? For Black people, it's been tremendously isolating and challenging. It's already isolating and challenging to be poor. In a city like Baltimore, where 30% of the population lives at or below the poverty line, like COVID just expanded that, right? It exacerbated that. And so, like, you just don't know when you're starting your founder journey what difficulties or challenges you're going to face. And so the more investment you can make in your own mental health so that you have the tools for how to like navigate these kinds of things as they come up, the better off we're going to be. Because Black people, let's face it, we just have more shit that we have to come to the table with, you know, because we're usually, if we're successful, we're the first or one of the only people in our family to get to the table, right? To begin with. And we've got so many people relying on us. The more you can invest in your own mental health to make sure you're stable, the better off you're going to be. Just be courageous, you know, trust your intuition, right? Even when you don't know things, just continue to like, you know, seek out help professionally from people who have been there. You know, if you can't get to them, get to somebody close to them that can then introduce you to them. Just find a way, right? And express gratitude every day. All you need this year, it's 2023, should be about 2 things for you guys. Should be about gratitude and progress. And you just need to make a little bit every day.
A little bit every day. Luke, I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you. Your spirit is we're in a simulation of some sort, and it's interesting navigating through it day to day, but you're an amazing addition to this game called life that we're all playing. And I think you've dropped so much value today, and I'm truly grateful for this conversation.
I hope so. I really hope so. And if reach out to me if there's any way I can be helpful. My Instagram page is at No Mud No Magic, NOMUD NOMAGIC, No Mud No Magic, and then you can also find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm very active and accessible. I can't invest in everything. I can't mentor everybody, but I'm happy to provide sort of direction in terms of resources and other things that might be helpful to folks. Don't hesitate to connect to me.
Yes, he really is accessible, y'all. And I'm looking forward to 2023. I already know it'll be an amazing year. Here's his Instagram.
Yeah, we gotta get those followers up. I got 200. It's anemic. I got 247 followers. We need to be able to double that, right? So, like, if you valued this conversation, you're online listening right now, and you valued it, like, send my LinkedIn profile, my Instagram profile to 10 people that would love to sort of engage further. It's just important work that we got to do.
And check out his website as well, Latimer, LATIMER.VC. That was the most interesting part of when I met you. Not to double back in the conversation because I could sit here and talk to you all day. But
we'll do another one. We'll do another one.
It was thoughtful how you named your company.
Thank you. Yeah, most people don't know that, right? But Lewis Latimer, first and foremost, he grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where I'm from. Where the project dwelling that I grew up in was called Pequanix Housing. We lived on the 2nd floor, and we had an apartment on the 7th floor as well. And I could see Whiting Street, right, which is now called Lewis Latimer Way, where he had all of his instruments and his facility for testing. He's the one who created the light bulb. He's the one who invented the light bulb. His work around carbon filaments, was all of the things that, Edison was needed to actually be successful with the light bulb. Edison found him in Bridgeport, Connecticut, brought him onto the team. He's the only black person on Edison's team. He never got the credit and he never got the money. And Latimer Ventures exists today to make sure that black founders, as they're building the most important enterprise softwares in the world, they're getting the money and the credit that they deserve in their time.
Amazing, man. Thank you so much, Luke, for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the time. Be well.
Bye.
Bye-bye.